The gentle hum of the medical bay filled Naira's sensory membranes as she prepared her instruments. Her iridescent scales shifted through shades of blue and green, reflecting her focused state of mind. The research vessel Helios drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, carrying its precious cargo of scientific discoveries, including their latest acquisition, a human specimen. Naira had studied countless species across the galaxy, but humans remained an enigma. Their civilization was young, their technology primitive by galactic standards, yet they had achieved remarkable progress in such a short time. As the ship's lead xenobiologist, she had petitioned for months to study a live human subject, and now one lay before her, suspended in stasis. James Marshall, according to the identification chip they had found. A maintenance engineer from one of Earth's orbital stations. His unconscious form seemed so fragile, so vulnerable under the soft purple glow of the medical scanners. Naira's third eye blinked rapidly, processing the preliminary data streaming across her visual cortex. "Begin preliminary examination," she spoke into the ship's recording system. Her auxiliary arms extended from their resting positions, each holding a different scanning device. Subject appears to be male, approximately 30 Earth years in age. Physical condition suggests regular physical activity and adequate nutrition. As she moved closer, Naira noticed something unusual. The human's vital signs showed patterns she had never encountered before, subtle variations in brain activity that didn't match any known species in their vast database. She adjusted her sensors, wondering if there might be an error in the readings. "Computer, verify calibration of neural pattern scanners," she commanded, her primary hands hovering over the human's temples. The system chirped an affirmative response. The equipment was functioning perfectly. The mystery deepened as she began her detailed analysis. Human anatomy was supposedly simple, practically primitive compared to her own species' complex biological systems. Yet as she studied James's cellular structure, she found layers of complexity that defied conventional understanding. Their regenerative capabilities, while slow by galactic standards, showed remarkable efficiency. Their immune systems, though basic, demonstrated surprising adaptability. But it was their neural architecture that truly captured Naira's attention. The human brain, with its seemingly chaotic arrangement of synapses and neurons, somehow achieved levels of creativity and abstract thinking that rivaled the most advanced species. Note for further investigation, Naira recorded, her voice betraying a hint of excitement. Human neural patterns suggest possible undocumented cognitive abilities. Recommend full-spectrum analysis of subjects' brain activity during various states of consciousness. As she spoke, James's fingers twitched slightly, an involuntary response to her scanners and neural stimulation. Naira froze, her scales flickering to a cautious amber. The movement wasn't entirely unexpected, but it sent an unfamiliar sensation through her body. This wasn't just another specimen on her examination table. This was a sentient being, capable of thoughts, dreams, and emotions as complex as her own. The realization struck her with unexpected force. Throughout her career, Naira had maintained professional detachment from her subjects. It was the first rule of xenobiological research. But something about this human stirred a different response in her. Perhaps it was the peaceful expression on his face, or the way his chest rose and fell with each breath, but she found herself wondering about his life, his experiences, his world. "Computer, access Earth Cultural Database," she requested, her auxiliary arms retracting as she pulled up a hovering display. "Focus on human social structures and emotional responses." The information flooded her visual cortex, images and data about human relationships, their capacity for love, fear, joy, and sorrow. Their lives were remarkably short by galactic standards, yet they lived with an intensity that seemed to defy their limited lifespan. A soft groan escaped James's lips, causing Naira's scales to ripple with surprise. The stasis field should have kept him fully unconscious, but somehow his consciousness was fighting against the suppression. She quickly adjusted the field strength, her movements precise but gentle. "Fascinating," she whispered, watching as his brain activity spiked in response to her adjustments. "Their resilience extends beyond mere physical attributes." As she continued her examination, Naira found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. The standard protocol called for invasive testing, procedures that, while scientifically valuable, could cause significant trauma to the subject. Looking at James's peaceful face, she felt an unfamiliar reluctance to proceed with these tests. The ship's communication system chimed, interrupting her thoughts. "Research Director Naira," a voice announced, "the Council requests your preliminary report on the human subject within the next solar cycle." Naira acknowledged the message, her scales shifting to a troubled gray. She had a duty to her profession, to her species, to uncover the secrets that made humans unique. But as she stood there, watching James Marshall's steady breathing, she wondered if there might be more to learn from observation than dissection. "Computer, begin long-term monitoring protocol," she decided, her voice firm. "Record all cellular and neural activities. Maintain current stasis levels." She would find another way to study this fascinating creature, one that didn't require destroying what made him human in the first place. As she prepared to end her shift, Naira took one last look at her subject. James Marshall, the human who had inadvertently challenged everything she thought she knew about scientific objectivity. Something told her that this was just the beginning of a much larger discovery, one that might change not just her understanding of humans, but of life itself. Days aboard the Helios passed like ripples in a quantum stream, each one bringing new revelations that challenged Naira's understanding of human physiology. She found herself spending increasingly long hours in the medical bay, watching as James Marshall's body demonstrated remarkable adaptability even in its suspended state. The morning cycle began as usual with Naira reviewing the overnight data collected by her monitoring systems. Her scales shifted to an intrigued purple when she noticed an anomaly in the readings. During the ship's night cycle, James's brain had shown increased activity in regions associated with dreaming, despite the stasis field that should have suppressed such functions. "Computer, replay neural activity patterns from time index 0400 to 0500, she commanded, her third eye focusing intently on the holographic display that materialized before her. The patterns were unlike anything she had seen before, complex waves of electrical activity that seemed to dance through his neural pathways like aurora in the night sky. As she studied the readings, James's fingers twitched again, more deliberately this time. Naira's scales flickered with concern as she noticed his vital signs beginning to fluctuate. The stasis field was weakening, and his consciousness was fighting its way to the surface. "Remarkable," she muttered, quickly adjusting her instruments. "Their neural plasticity exceeds all previous estimates." She had to make a quick decision: increase the stasis field strength or allow him to regain partial consciousness under controlled conditions. Scientific curiosity won out. Naira carefully modulated the stasis field, maintaining just enough suppression to prevent full awakening while allowing increased neural activity. James's eyelids fluttered, and his breathing pattern changed, becoming more irregular. "Can you hear me?" she asked softly, knowing that human auditory processing remained active even in semi-conscious states. James's brain activity spiked in response to her voice, confirming her theory. A low groan escaped his lips, and his eyes opened partially, unfocused but searching. Naira's scales rippled with excitement and apprehension. This wasn't part of the approved protocol, but the opportunity to study human consciousness as it emerged from stasis was too valuable to ignore. "You're safe," she assured him, using the ship's translation matrix to convert her natural harmonics into human speech. "Try not to move. You're under observation." James's eyes widened slightly as they focused on her form, but surprisingly, his vital signs didn't spike with fear as she had expected. Instead, his neural patterns showed intense curiosity mixed with confusion. "Where?" His voice was rough from disuse, but the translation matrix had no trouble interpreting his meaning. You're aboard a research vessel, Naira replied, carefully monitoring his reactions. We're studying human physiology. How do you feel? James seemed to consider this for a moment, his brain activity showing complex patterns of analytical thought. Like I've been hit by a truck, he managed to say, then surprisingly, his lips curved slightly upward, a smile Naira recalled from her studies of human expressions. The gesture fascinated her. Even in this vulnerable position, humans maintain their capacity for humor. She made a note to include this observation in her report. The discomfort is temporary, she explained, adjusting the environmental controls to better suit human comfort levels. Your body is adapting to the stasis field's effects. James's eyes tracked her movements with increasing clarity. You're not what I expected aliens to look like, he commented, his voice growing stronger. Naira's scales shifted to an amused turquoise. And you're not what I expected humans to be like, she responded. Your species continues to surprise us. As if to demonstrate this point, James attempted to move his hand, fighting against the remaining effects of the stasis field. The effort should have been impossible given the field's strength, yet somehow, through sheer determination, he managed to lift his fingers slightly off the examination surface. Please conserve your strength, Naira advised, though she was carefully recording every detail of this unexpected display of will. Your body needs time to recover. Time, James repeated, his voice taking on a contemplative tone. How long have I been here? Naira hesitated. The truth might cause distress, which could interfere with her observations. But something in James's steady gaze made her reconsider the standard protocol of deception. 17 Earth days, she answered honestly, watching as his neural patterns processed this information. To her surprise, instead of panic or anger, James's brain activity showed patterns of analytical thinking. The station, he said slowly. My crew. Did anyone else? You were the only one we encountered, Naira replied, noting how his concern for others manifested even in this situation. Your station appeared to be undergoing routine maintenance when we acquired you. James processed this information, his neural patterns showing complex emotional responses that Naira found fascinating. Humans seemed capable of experiencing multiple, sometimes contradictory emotions simultaneously, a trait that set them apart from many species she had studied. Why me? He asked finally, his eyes meeting her third eye with unexpected directness. The question caught Naira off guard. In all her years of research, no subject had ever asked her that. Most species they studied either couldn't comprehend their situation or responded with primitive fear or aggression. But James was different, he was trying to understand. You were alone. Accessible. An opportunity for study, she explained, then added, surprising herself, but you're proving to be much more than just a subject. James's neural patterns showed a spike of interest at this admission. More how? Before Naira could respond, the ship's communication system chimed. Research Director Naira, the Council requests your immediate presence for a progress review. Her scales shifted to a concerned gray. She hadn't reported James's partial awakening, and the Council would not approve of her unauthorized interaction with the subject. But the insights she had gained in these few minutes of conversation were more valuable than weeks of clinical observation. Rest now, she told James, reaching for the stasis controls. We'll continue this discussion later. As she prepared to increase the stasis field, James spoke again, his voice fading but determined. I'll remember this, Naira. Her scales flickered with surprise at hearing her name from human lips. As James slipped back into unconsciousness, she realized that something fundamental had changed. This was no longer just a research project, it had become an exchange between two sentient beings, each with something to learn from the other. The council meeting had left Naira shaken, her scales a turbulent mix of grays and dark blues as she hurried back to the medical bay. Her superiors had been clear, the human subject was to be prepared for deep tissue analysis, a procedure that would render him permanently unconscious. The order felt like a physical weight in her secondary stomach. As she entered the medical bay, her attention immediately went to the monitoring systems. During her absence, James's neural patterns had become increasingly active, fighting against the stasis field with remarkable persistence. The human's consciousness was proving to be far more resilient than anyone had anticipated. Director Naira, the ship's AI, announced, "The subject's cellular stress indicators are approaching critical levels. The stasis field is failing to maintain proper suppression." She rushed to the examination table, her auxiliary arms extending to access multiple control panels simultaneously. James's body was trembling slightly, his skin covered in a fine sheen of sweat. The reading showed his immune system mounting an aggressive response against the stasis field's effects. "Impossible," she whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, James's body had begun adapting to the stasis technology, treating it as an invasive threat. It was an unprecedented reaction that threatened to destabilize his entire biological system. His eyes snapped open suddenly, startling her. "Naira," he gasped, the name cleared despite his labored breathing. "Something's wrong." "Try to remain calm," she instructed, her scales shifting rapidly through patterns of concern and concentration. "Your body is rejecting the stasis field." James's hands clenched into fists as another wave of tremors passed through him. "It burns," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "Like fire in my veins." Naira's third eye rapidly processed the cascading failure of the stasis system. She had two options: follow protocol and increase the field strength to force his compliance, likely causing severe neural damage, or deactivate the field entirely and risk the Council's wrath. Time seemed to slow as she watched James struggle. In his eyes, she saw not just pain but a fierce determination to survive. This wasn't just about scientific observation anymore, it was about preserving something remarkable. "Computer, initiate emergency stasis purge," she commanded, her voice steady despite the gravity of her decision. "Begin cellular stabilization sequence." Warning indicators flashed across her displays as the stasis field dissolved. James's body arched off the examination table, his muscles spasming as his nervous system reasserted control. Naira moved quickly, her auxiliary arms administering a cocktail of stabilizing compounds while her primary hands supported his convulsing form. "Stay with me, James," she urged, watching as his vital signs fluctuated wildly. "Fight through it." His hand suddenly grabbed one of hers, the grip surprisingly strong. The direct physical contact sent a shock through her sensory membranes. Such intimate interaction between species was strictly forbidden. But in that moment of connection, she felt something profound, the raw, primal force of human survival instinct. "Director Naira," the ship's AI interrupted, "the Council has been notified of the stasis field deactivation. Security teams are en route to the medical bay." She ignored the warning, focusing entirely on stabilizing James's condition. His neural patterns were chaotic but showing signs of self-organization, something that should have been impossible given the trauma his system had just endured. "Why?" James managed to ask between ragged breaths, his eyes fixed on hers. "Why help me?" Naira's scales rippled with emotions she hadn't known she could feel. "Because you've shown me that there's more to understanding life than dissecting it. Your species' resilience, your adaptability, it's not just biological. It's something deeper." The medical bay doors slid open with a harsh hiss. Security officers poured in, their weapon arrays humming with contained energy. "Director Naira, step away from the subject," the lead officer commanded. "You are relieved of your duties." James's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Despite his weakened state, his neural patterns showed concern, not for himself, but for her. It was yet another surprise from this remarkable creature. "I won't let them harm you," she assured him quietly, her scales setting into a determined pattern of deep purple. Turning to face the security team, she drew herself up to her full height. This human is no longer a research subject. He is a sentient being under my medical protection. The council's orders are clear, the lead officer stated, advancing slowly. The specimen must be preserved for analysis. Analysis? Naira's voice took on a harmonic of authority she had never used before. Look at him. He adapted to our most advanced stasis technology in a matter of days. His neural patterns show complexity we barely understand. Destroying him would be destroying an opportunity to learn something far more valuable than tissue samples could ever reveal. She felt James's consciousness fading behind her, his body needed rest to recover from the trauma. But even as he slipped into natural sleep, his brain patterns maintained a remarkable coherence. The council will not accept this, the security officer warned, though his weapons had lowered slightly. Then perhaps it's time for the council to learn something new as well, Naira responded, her auxiliary arms still monitoring James's vital signs. We claim to be seekers of knowledge, yet we destroy what we don't understand. This human has shown me that true understanding requires more than observation, it requires connection. The security team shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Naira's reputation as a researcher carried weight, and her obvious willingness to risk everything for her conviction was giving them pause. Behind her, James had stabilized, his breathing evening out as his body began its natural healing process. His hand had relaxed its grip but remained in contact with hers, a silent testament to the bridge that had formed between their species. I will present my findings to the full council, she declared, her scales now showing the clear, unwavering pattern of absolute certainty. And I will prove that there are better ways to advance our understanding than through destruction. As if in response to her words, James's neural patterns showed a subtle shift, even in sleep, his brain was adapting, healing, demonstrating the remarkable resilience that had drawn her to study him in the first place. In that moment, Naira knew she had made the right choice, regardless of the consequences. 2 cycles had passed since the confrontation in the medical bay. Through a combination of scientific evidence and passionate advocacy, Naira had managed to secure a temporary stay of the council's termination order. Now she found herself in uncharted territory, both professionally and personally, as she worked to understand her human patient in entirely new ways. James sat upright on the examination table, no longer restrained or sedated, watching with evident curiosity as Naira's auxiliary arms manipulated the holographic displays around them. His recovery had been remarkable, another testament to human resilience. Your cellular regeneration rate is fascinating, Naira observed, her scales shimmering with scientific excitement. The trauma from the stasis field should have caused lasting damage, but your body has almost completely adapted. We're good at bouncing back, James replied with that curious upward curve of his lips that Naira had come to recognize as a smile. It's kind of our thing. The casual way he referred to his species' incredible adaptability made her third eye blink rapidly in amazement. You say that as if it's unremarkable, she noted, but I've studied thousands of species, and none have shown this level of physiological flexibility. James shrugged, another uniquely human gesture. Maybe you've been studying them wrong, he suggested. You can't understand a species just by examining their parts. The observation struck Naira deeply, causing her scales to shift to a thoughtful blue. That's what I've been trying to explain to the council, she admitted. But centuries of scientific tradition are difficult to overcome. Tell me about your people, James said suddenly, surprising her. Not the scientific stuff, what makes you who you are? Naira paused in her data collection, considering the request. Such personal exchanges were discouraged in research settings, but hadn't she already broken countless protocols? Her scales rippled with slight uncertainty before settling into a calm pattern. We are a species driven by the pursuit of knowledge, she began, moving to sit on a nearby observation stool. From our earliest records, we've sought to understand everything around us. Our three-lobed brains are specifically evolved for pattern recognition and data analysis. That explains the third eye, James noted, gesturing to her central optical organ. But what about the scales? They keep changing color. An evolutionary adaptation for nonverbal communication, she explained, watching his face light up with interest. Each pattern and color shift conveys emotional and intellectual states. It's involuntary, making deception nearly impossible among my kind. Sounds lonely, James observed softly, catching her off guard. Lonely? Her scales flickered with confusion. Never being able to hide what you're feeling, he clarified. Sometimes humans need that, a moment to process our emotions before sharing them. The insight was profound in its simplicity. Naira had never considered emotional privacy as a valuable trait, but suddenly she understood why humans could be so complex, so contradictory, and yet so innovative. Is that why your species creates art? She asked, genuinely curious. As a way to process hidden emotions? James's face lit up with another smile, broader this time. That's part of it. We create because we need to express what we can't always say directly. Music, painting, poetry, they're all languages of their own. We have no equivalent, Naira admitted, her scales shifting to a shade of wistful green she hadn't experienced before. Our arts are mathematical, precise. We seek patterns, not possibilities. Maybe that's why you find us so fascinating, James suggested. We're living proof that chaos and order can coexist. As if to demonstrate his point, he reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently touched one of her scales. The contact sent a ripple of iridescent colors across her surface, a reaction she couldn't control. Instead of withdrawing in embarrassment, she found herself intrigued by the spontaneity of the moment. Your body temperature is higher than ours, she observed, her scientist's mind automatically collecting data even in this intimate moment. Yet you maintain remarkable homeostasis. James chuckled, the sound carrying notes of both amusement and affection. Even when you're being emotional, you can't help but analyze. Is that wrong? She asked, genuine concern coloring her scales. No, he assured her. It's who you are. Just like being emotional while trying to be logical is who we are. Maybe that's what both our species need to learn, that understanding doesn't mean changing who we are, but accepting who we can become together. The profound simplicity of his statement resonated through Naira's entire being, causing her scales to shimmer with a new pattern she had never displayed before, one that represented something between wonder and revelation. The Council believes that knowledge must be extracted and catalogued, she said slowly. But you've shown me that true understanding grows naturally when we allow ourselves to connect, to share, to learn from each other's differences. That's the most human thing you've said yet, James responded warmly. And the most enlightening observation I've heard came from a species we considered primitive, Naira countered, her scales now glowing with a soft, steady light of comprehension. The ship's communication system chimed gently, reminding them that the next council session would begin soon. Naira would have to present her findings, defend her actions, and argue for a new approach to xenological research. They may not understand, she said, her scales showing traces of anxiety. Then help them understand, James encouraged. Show them what you've shown me, that there's more to knowledge than what you can measure in a lab. Naira's scales settled into a pattern of determination. She knew that whatever the council decided, her perspective had been irreversibly changed. She had learned more about life, consciousness, and the nature of understanding in these few cycles with James than in all her years of research combined. As she prepared her presentation for the council, she realized that the true breakthrough wasn't in understanding human physiology, but in recognizing the beautiful complexity that arose when different species chose to learn from each other rather than dissect their differences. The grand chamber of the scientific council loomed before Naira, its crystalline walls refracting light in complex patterns that mirrored the neural pathways she had studied so intently. James stood beside her, his presence both a comfort and a statement. This was the first time a research subject had ever addressed the council directly. "You challenge centuries of methodological precedent, Director Naira," the chief counselor's scales rippled with disapproval, their deep crimson hue reflecting off the chamber walls. "Our understanding of the universe has been built upon controlled observation and systematic analysis." "With respect, honored counsel," Naira replied, her own scales steady in their conviction, "I stand before you with evidence that there are truths we cannot discover through dissection alone." She gestured to the holographic displays surrounding them, showing James's neural patterns, cellular adaptation rates, and the remarkable data collected during his recovery. "The human body demonstrates capabilities that defy our traditional models of biological limitation. But more importantly, their consciousness exhibits patterns of growth and adaptation that we're only beginning to understand." James stepped forward, his movement causing a ripple of murmurs through the assembled council members. Their scales flickered with a mixture of fascination and unease at his proximity. "I am not here as a specimen," he began, his voice clear and steady. "I stand before you as a representative of humanity, offering an opportunity for genuine exchange between our species." Naira's third eye tracked the council members' reactions, noting how their scales shifted through various shades of surprise and consideration. She had coached James on the formal protocols, but his natural eloquence exceeded her expectations. "In the time I've spent with Director Naira," James continued, "I've learned as much about your species as you've learned about mine. True understanding isn't a one-way process of examination, it's a dialogue between equals." The chief counselor's scales darkened. "You speak of dialogue, yet your species has barely ventured beyond its own solar system. What could you possibly teach us?" "Perhaps," Naira interjected, "that very question reveals our own limitations. We've become so focused on measuring advancement through technological achievement that we've overlooked other forms of evolution." She activated a new holographic display, showing the complex emotional patterns she had recorded during her interactions with James. "Humans possess an extraordinary capacity for what they call emotional intelligence, the ability to understand, process, and grow through subjective experience. Their art, their music, their literature, these aren't primitive attempts at expression, but sophisticated tools for exploring consciousness itself." "And how does this benefit our scientific understanding?" another council member demanded, their scales pulsing with skepticism. "Because it challenges everything we thought we knew about consciousness and adaptation," Naira replied. Her auxiliary arms manipulated the displays, showing how James's neural patterns had evolved during their interactions. "Humans don't just survive, they transform. Their minds create new pathways, their bodies adapt to new challenges, and their spirits, yes, their spirits, drive them to explore possibilities we haven't even considered." James reached out and touched one of the holographic representations of his own brain patterns. "Your technology is incredible," he acknowledged, "but technology alone can't explain why we dream, why we create, why we connect with others. These aren't flaws in our design, they're features that have helped us survive and grow." The chamber fell silent as the council processed this. Naira's scales shifted to a pattern of quiet hope as she observed their reactions. Some showed signs of intrigue, others uncertainty, but none displayed the outright dismissal she had feared. "What exactly are you proposing, Director Naira?" the chief counselor finally asked. "A new approach to xenological research," she responded, her scales brightening with passion. "One that combines our traditional methods with interactive study. Instead of treating other species as subjects to be examined, we engage with them as partners in understanding the universe." "It's risky," James added with a slight smile, "but then again, so is assuming you already know everything there is to know." A ripple of color passed through the council members' scales, amusement, Naira realized with surprise. James's gentle challenge had struck a chord. "And what of you?" the chief counselor addressed James directly. "Would you willingly stay as our first research partner?" James glanced at Naira, his expression warm. "I would." Not as a captive, but as an ambassador. There's so much our species could learn from each other, if we're willing to try. Naira's scales shimmered with joy and pride as she watched understanding dawn across the council chamber. This was more than a victory for her research, it was the beginning of a new chapter in their species' approach to knowledge itself. Very well, the chief counselor announced, their scales settling into a formal pattern of acceptance. We will establish a pilot program for this new methodology. Director Naira, you will oversee its implementation, with your human partner as our first cooperative subject. As the chamber erupted in discussion, Naira felt James's hand brush against her auxiliary arm, a gesture of shared triumph. Her scales rippled with an iridescent pattern that reflected not just her own happiness but the boundless possibilities that lay ahead. You know, James murmured, on Earth we have a saying, the truth will set you free. Naira's third eye blinked in appreciation of the sentiment. They had indeed found a truth, not in the sterile confines of traditional research, but in the beautiful, chaotic, wonderful space between species. It was a truth that would transform both their peoples, one shared understanding at a time.